Now the dust has settled a bit on the election, I think it's worth taking a bit of stock about the success we've had on the left and how we prove the critics wrong, but crucially, how we build on the success. This is a really exciting moment, as far as I'm concerned. And my view is the left can win dozens of seats at the next general election, making Labour dependent on them, meaning a minority government where in exchange for support, that government has to agree progressive, social and economic reforms, as well as a change in foreign policy and a referendum on changing the electoral system to proportional representation, so we don't have a farcical electoral system where you can win a third of the vote and 2/3 of the seats, whereas smaller parties like the Greens are prevented from getting seats, and indeed many people who would vote for them don't do so because they fear that the Tories will win if they did. Sounds big and ambitious, doesn't it? Good, time to be ambitious. Unless we want the far right to benefit from the disillusionment we'll see with Starmerism. And we've seen that happen in France after a protracted rule by their version of Starmer, President Macron, who came to power in a country which was not in as bad a state as we're in today. And if it wasn't for the left there, the far right would now be taking power in that country. Now, back in March, I left the Labour Party, a party my family have backed for generations, literally. My great-granddad and my grandmother were Labour councillors. My parents met campaigning for the Labour Party. Small violin. I was gifted a Labour Party membership on my 15th birthday by my mum because I'm such a loser. So I backed the founding of We Deserve Better earlier this year, which called for a case-by-case backing of candidates based on that totally extreme and crazy basis of what do they actually stand for? Do they support increasing taxes on the rich, public investment, public ownership, workers' rights, strong trade unions, not screwing over young people with things like student debt, drastic policies on climate, which also improve living standards, dealing with the housing crisis, not legitimising genocide. I know, moon on the stick stuff, I know, what we like. So our position was vote Green or independent, or for a left-wing Labour candidate, like, say, Zara Sultana or John McDonnell or Clive Lewis. A Labour landslide was inevitable, we said, so therefore you could vote with your conscience. We had a lot of critics yelling at us. But let's just listen now to Michael Walker at Novara Media discussing this strategy. He talks about why, in entirely good faith, he was quietly sceptical, certainly not having a go at him, but how it defied the expectations.
That reminds me, I have to say, I definitely wasn't critical of it, but I wasn't entirely sort of, I suppose, emotionally bought in to, Owen Jones sort of like, we deserve better, Labour are going to win a majority, so campaign for Greens, campaign for independence. My sort of sense was a bit like, now's not really, people really want to get rid of the Conservatives. That is going to be sort of overwhelming, just sort of this feeling that we want rid of the Conservatives, so we're going to vote Labour. I thought that if there was going to be a sort of moment for third parties and for independence, it would probably be in 5 years' time. I mean, these results have basically proven me wrong. And, one person who I think, comes out looking very good from these results in terms of the strategy they've had over the past few weeks and the outcome is Owen Jones, right? He said over and over again, Labour are going to win a massive majority, keep them on their toes by voting for independents and Greens. Obviously, the issue he put front and centre over the past few weeks, past few months, has been Palestine. And, there were lots of people sort of on Twitter saying, oh, Owen Jones is going to be crying when Corbyn loses and Labour win this massive majority. He seems to be pretty vindicated in this general election, though.
100%, Michael. Look, I think this is a very interesting and positive set of results for the left, both inside the Labour Party, and of course there are still some people on the left inside Labour, but also beyond it. Personally, I think if Wes Streeting had lost, only 500 votes away from that happening, I think this would have been an incredible set of results for the left. And I think if he had lost to Liane Mohammed on the back of Gaza, Michael, every single Labour MP would say to themselves, their partners, their best friends, their political colleagues, I cannot muck about on this issue. I cannot take that free junket from LFI to Tel Aviv. I cannot both sides war crimes because I could lose my seat. Don't forget what happened to Wes Streeting. Now, I know John Ashworth has lost his seat, but I think Wes Streeting would have been a much higher scalp. I mean, this guy is a potential, future leader of the Labour Party. Isn't it ironic, by the way? Everybody in the media says that Wes Streeting is such a talented politician. He's a future leader. Nobody's got a bad word to say about him. He almost lost his seat. It was 500 votes away. The people that make the decisions and ultimately have power in this country are the voters. It's not several hundred journalists inside the M25. It's not LBC call-in studio producers and hosts.
Don't worry, I'm not simply trying to bask in glory here. I'm sure you're all aware I've got my haters, so you can excuse me for including some content which isn't just someone sharing some creative abuse. Just trying to emphasise how important this strategy is. And I'm not trying to claim, by the way, we deserve better, somehow entirely responsible or anything like that for what happened last week. That would be delusional, arrogant nonsense. The point is just that this overall strategy pushed by lots of people was successful to reassure people they could vote for the Greens or indeed independents, and they would not risk a Labour landslide. They wouldn't risk specifically the Tories winning. Now, Starmerites spent a lot of time yelling at us during that election, claiming those of our disposition were trying to hand the Tories the election, or that the Greens or independents were no hopers. Unlucky guys, the Greens won every single one of their 4 target seats. They defeated a Labour shadow cabinet minister. They got their highest vote share ever. They won around 2 million votes. They came second place in dozens of seats, most of them Labour. We'll talk about that. That's key. The former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, of course, purged by Starmer, defied expectations. He won a majority of over 7,000. 4 other independents won, one of them unseating Jonathan Ashworth, another Labour shadow cabinet minister. Indeed, as noted by Aaron Bastani there, Leah Mohammed, a 23-year-old British Palestinian woman standing as an independent in Ilford North in East London, nearly defeated the Shadow Health Secretary, now Health Secretary, the pro-privatisation Wes Streeting, with around 500 votes as a margin of victory. So now we've got to build on the strategy. We've got to hit the ground running. Firstly, left-wing Labour MPs need to come out swinging. They shouldn't be scared of getting purged, which before the election they were, and they had every reason to be so. I believe it will come out in the coming months that Labour had intended to call far more left-wing MPs and were only stopped from doing so because Rishi Sunak called an unexpectedly early election, because they were taken back by the ferocity of the backlash by their attempt to purge Diane Abbott, who commendably stood her ground, and their successful attempt to purge the brilliant Faiza Shaheen as a candidate in Chingford and Woodford Green. That itself offers Labour a warning. She ran as an independent candidate, rightly so, and in spite of the leadership, the factional spite meant the Conservative former Cabinet Minister Ian Duncan Smith won that constituency. So Labour know if they purge MPs, that will cause them grief. If they stand as an independent, they'll either win it like Jeremy Corbyn or split the vote, allowing the Tories to win, or they will defect to the Green Party. And by defecting to the Green Party, they will increase the Green Party's national profile and stature, lift the Green Party's vote share in constituencies across the country they need to win, and make it more likely they will win seats off Labour elsewhere. So the Labour left MPs should just loudly state their politics and criticise the Labour leadership when it crosses red lines. They should demand the taxing of the rich, public investment, public ownership, opposing privatisation, workers' rights, action on climate, housing, taking on Israel's war crimes, you name it. In the belief, they know that Labour would be mad to go for them. And if they do go for them, so what? You have a good chance of winning as a Green or as an independent, and what's the point of being in Parliament if you can't say what you think and fight for your beliefs? Why are you even there? But there now needs to be a plan for those seats where the Green Party came second. They won 4 seats, as I say, 1 in Bristol, 1 in Brighton, the other 2 formerly Tory rural areas. But crucially, their top results are overwhelmingly urban Labour seats. That's where they clearly need to advance. Here's some examples. In Bristol East, up against the Labour now Minister, Kerry McCarthy, the Greens went from 4% in 2019 to 30.7% this time, winning over 14,000 votes. Bear in mind that the Greens focused their campaigning overwhelmingly on the 4 seats they won. In Bristol, that was Bristol Central, and Labour's vote shares fell in seats like this despite Labour winning an overall landslide majority, and despite them not being in government yet, where they will actively piss people off. In Huddersfield, a working class town in West Yorkshire, the Greens went from just over 4% in 2019 to 26.3% this time round. In Sheffield Central, they went from 9% to 26%. In Bristol South, they went from 4.9% to 25%, up against another government minister. In Hackney South, they went from 5.4% to nearly 24%. I could go on. Similar jumps in Leeds Central, followed by Hackney North, where they got 22.6%. That's despite Diane Abbott being the candidate there, who many left-wingers voted for there. But I know those who didn't, because they knew Labour, that Diane would win, but they wanted a protest at Starmer's Labour. Lewisham North in South East London, Birkenhead in Merseyside, Walthamstow in North London. The Greens won over a fifth of the vote in all of those seats. I could go on. Imagine what could be done with actual campaigning in those seats. The Greens, as I said, didn't really do that this time. There needs to be a really big push in those seats, firstly, to make sure the voters know there that the Greens come second. A lot of local voters won't even know that. That's important because then they'll see the Greens as a viable alternative. They'll be able to say, it's now between Labour and the Greens here. That has to be front and centre in people's mind. That will build a firewall against false messages by Labour to squeeze the vote. That's you either vote Labour or the Tories will win here. When I spoke to voters in Islington South, they thought voting Green would be a wasted vote. They worry the Tories might win. That's impossible here. So the fact the Greens managed to get 17.5% here, up over 13 points, with no real campaigning, only very little, is phenomenal. Imagine what could be happening if huge amounts of campaigning was taking place. Now, there needs to be a way of getting even a small slither of those Green voters to get involved so they can reach other voters. So as people get disillusioned with Starmerism, they can peel off Labour to the Green Party and put the Greens in the lead in these seats. Well, We Deserve Better isn't run by me, but I was proud to use my platform to support them, and I think they've got huge potential in winning over more of those seats. And at the next election, if they win seats off Labour, the Green Party, depending on how things shift, you can see the potential for a hung parliament where Labour is the biggest party and forced to depend on the Greens and, say, independents in exchange for being more progressive. And in such an agreement, you could have a referendum on proportional representation. There shouldn't be a coalition, because in coalitions, the bigger party tends to devour the smaller party, and Labour would undoubtedly try and stitch the Greens and other parties up. But that's what we should be aiming for. Aim big. There's every reason to do so. We can, within the next few years, lay the foundations for a genuinely progressive government and an end to an electoral system which benefits reactionary politics. Love to hear your thoughts. Please like, subscribe, leave your comments. Help us keep the show on the road at patreon.com/OJ84. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.